Well, hello, everybody. As I've mentioned recently in emails, I'm going to be doing some shorts. We recently did a short dealing with the destruction of Damascus and also an attack on Iran, on the leadership, as well as the nuclear facilities. So those are available to you, and the links are in the emails I've sent out. Today, we want to look at two different things. This first one is going to be the days of Noah and Lot. And so we'll just go ahead and get started and try and keep these short. In Matthew 24, verse 36, the disciples are asking Jesus about the end times. And Jesus said, "But of that day and hour," meaning the tribulation, "no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." So, I mean, that's kind of a bummer, right? Nobody knows, not even Jesus and the angels. So I guess we just got to hope for the best and stumble through life cluelessly, unless we keep reading. And as we do, we're told by Jesus that the days leading up to the end will be like the days of Noah and later the days of Lot. And so, what were those days like? Because they're giving us an indication of how it's going to look just before the tribulation period. Now, if we continue on in that passage, verse 37 says, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in the days before the flood, which was God's judgment, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark." So, okay, we don't know the day or the hour, but we do know what the days are going to look like. And in the Greek, it says exactly as it was. So, in other words, Jesus is saying what was happening then is going to be replicated again at the end time. So let's take a look at this. If we want to know when Jesus is coming for us, then we need to understand what Noah's days were like just before the rain started to fall. So we go back now to Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. And it says, "Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth," leading to a population explosion, "and daughters were born to the men, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years." Now remember, up to this time, they were living 900 plus years. Verse 4 says, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward." That's important. "When the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord." And then in Hebrews 11, verse 7, it says, "By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith." So if we look at the genealogy as we start, first there's Jared. It means to bring down. Then Enoch, whose name meant dedicated or initiated. And remember, he was taken to heaven by faith. He walked with God and he was no more. He was the first rapture. And then there was Lamech, and then there was Methuselah. So Methuselah is Noah's grandfather. And his name meant when he is gone, it will come. And in God's mercy, he let Methuselah live longer than anyone else ever, 969 years. Now, his father, Lamech, was a very sinful man. He broke God's commandments. He married two women. He was very violent. And this may very well be why God let Methuselah live so long. So Noah knew exactly what God meant because his grandpa Methuselah had been preparing him, passing down the plan from generation to generation. And he acted on it. The day that Methuselah died, the rain started falling. So how's that for a prophecy being fulfilled? And how important it is for you and me to pass on everything God is teaching us to our families and friends. Also, that grandpas can have a big impact on their grandsons. So here are some points I want to point out here that I think we can gain from these passages. In Matthew, first, the tribulation is a time of judgment on Israel. It's called Jacob's trouble. And it will also impact a sinful world at that time. It says that in the days before the flood, God's judgment was being based on a wicked, sinful world. And I'll describe that in a minute. It says that the Lord closed Noah and his family in the ark 7 days before the flood came. And I think that could be a pointer towards rapture, that he took them up above the judgment. Okay, so the only people God said were just was Noah and his families. And that word just is sadiq in the Hebrew. It means pure. Relates to being genetically pure, 100% human. And I think that's a key to understanding these end times. And 7 days, perhaps that is pointing to a gap between the rapture and the tribulation. Maybe there was a gap. Noah was closed into the ark 7 days before the first raindrop fell. So it's possible the rapture could occur 7 days before the tribulation, or 7 weeks before the tribulation, or 7 months, or 7 years. I think that 7 is significant. Then it says that God protected his people from the judgment. So think of us now, look going in towards the tribulation, and that things were basically business as usual at that time. When we look at it in Genesis, it says that the population, or students of the history say that the population was estimated to have been around 8 billion people at the time of the flood. And today we just passed over recent months, crossed over 8 billion people. So we're right back where they were at that time. And the elites today are concerned that we're overpopulated. They think the world should only have 500 million, which is interesting. And think about this. In Jesus' day, it's estimated there were only about 300 million people on the planet. 2,000 years later, it reached 4 billion. And in the last 50 years, it has doubled to 8 billion. So we are in a population explosion. Also, we're told that there was some odd spiritual activity going on, right? There was an attempt to corrupt man's DNA. There was widespread violence and bloodshed. Deception was running rampant. And as I read that, I think does gender confusion fit that description? There was also inclusion, right? The people accepted anything rather than offend anybody. There was no absolute truth. If this mingling was going on and the whole population was part of it and involved in it, then whatever was happening. And that, again, sounds very much like today. And then there will be a remnant of the righteous, right? Noah and his 7 family members are a remnant of people who were saved. Everyone else was destroyed. We read in Zechariah 13:8 that 33% of the Jewish people will get saved at the end, referred to again as a remnant. So now this is important. It says sons of God. And most Hebrew scholars and prophecy teachers say this refers to the angels. The word is Ben Elohim, which refers to fallen angels. So sons of God, think of fallen angels. And today, this sounds like transhumanism to me. It's a mix of fallen angels with humans. And this makes sense because it points out that the women were daughters of men. So God is highlighting for us they were sons of God and daughters of men. So of God and of men. There's a difference here between these two. It also says that God would wait for 120 years, meaning that God is patient. He's been waiting 2,000 years since Jesus was crucified. And that God says that there were giants in the land in Genesis. The word for giants is Nephilim, comes from the root word Nephal. Nephal means fallen ones. Think again, fallen angels, rebels or apostates. And it says that they gave birth to mighty men. Archaeology is today finding the remnants of skeletons, and some of them are 17 feet tall. And what's interesting, they note that they have 6 fingers and 6 toes on their hands and feet. And I'll point something out to you here in a moment. The book of Enoch, chapter 7, verses 2 to 6 says that there were also cannibals at that time. And in Enoch 8, verses 1 to 3, we're told that they imparted forbidden knowledge through the fallen angels regarding warfare. So they were being given technology on advanced warfare, on sexual corruption, and on occult practices. So that's another interesting thing. Now, one interesting biblical nugget, if you will, which seems to point to Noah and the rapture. In Genesis 6:14, God said, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch." And interesting, that word pitch is the Hebrew word kafar, which means to cover over, which would make sense, but it also means to purge, to make atonement, to propitiate, and to pardon. So what does that sound like? That sounds like what has happened with us with our salvation. In the New Testament, in Romans 5:11 and 11:15, and in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 18 and 19, the Greek word for reconciliation is tautologe. Tautologe, I can't pronounce that, which means atonement or restoration of divine favor. We go into the Old Testament, the word haporeth means the mercy seat. The only other time that word is used in the Hebrew, it means the mercy seat, and it meant the pitch that was put on the Ark of the Covenant. So if you think Noah covered the Ark with the pitch, and the Ark of the Covenant was covered with the same pitch, or kaporeth. In the New Testament, the word in Greek is hilasterion, which refers to the lid on the cover of the Ark of the Covenant, or propitiation. Right? So we see it, Romans 3:25 says, whom God set forth as a propitiation by his, Jesus' blood, through faith to demonstrate his righteousness, and so on. So you kind of see a picture here. God covered Noah and his family in the ark with the Old Testament type or version of the blood of Jesus, exact same word, and took him above the judgment that was falling on sinful mankind. So in my mind, Noah's ark is a picture of the mercy seat, the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. The pitch is a foreshadow of Jesus' blood that will be shed for sin. Noah and his family are a picture of the future church. And the flood is a foreshadow of the coming tribulation period. So I think all of these things fall together. Basically, this looks like a rapture in the Old Testament, as was Enoch, who walked with God and was taken to heaven. He disappeared, and he's the father of Methuselah. Elijah was taken up in a chariot and never died. Lot was taken up to a mountaintop, right? And before Sodom and Gomorrah was judged. And maybe even Rahab, who hung a scarlet ribbon out of her window and was rescued by the Israelis before they destroyed Jericho. So some of the things that happen today that are causing me to wonder if this is actually right upon us now. And we'll see more of this with Lot. But does the world appear to be at a point of and deserving of God's judgment? I would say absolutely with what's going on. Does the whole world scoff at talk of the rapture and say that nothing's changed, right? Everything's normal, nothing to see here. The people of Noah's day mocked him for building the ark, right? No one bought an umbrella or floaties. They absolutely ignored him and everything he was preaching. The judgment was coming on a sinful, wicked people. The good news for us is that we are neither as born again believers. We're not sinful. We're not wicked people. We've been saved. Our sins have been paid for at the cross. So I want to be careful here with some of these things. Fourth, did the recent cures, have to be careful how what I word these things, the recent cures actually modified or genetically changed, thinking about the Nephilim, RNA and DNA? And do the patents say that they do? A lot of people say, that's just, that's just some of that tinfoil hat stuff. Do the patents say that DNA was affected? If you doubt it, read the patents, because I have. You need to read them. And one of the procedures that came out with our producers of the cure is actually called Moderna. And the name is Moderna mRNA, modified RNA. That's their stock symbol. And you got to ask the question, why did our past president just pardon Fraudgy? Why would he need to be pardoned if he hadn't done anything wrong? Fifth, we have the Nephilim. Do we have Nephilim today? Right? In the line of being giants, I don't think so. Outside of Shaquille O'Neal, maybe. Nephilim, though, were hybrids. They were a mix of humans plus whatever these were, these fallen angels. So consider this today. We're being told by the world elites that we can become like God. Remember that phrase, become like God, and we can live forever. And say how? Okay, uploading our brains to the cloud. Think of what Satan said, Genesis 3, verses 4 and 5. Then the serpent Satan said to the woman Eve, you will not surely die, meaning you can live forever. Verse 5, God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So this guy, as part of the elites, his middle name is Noah. You don't have to worship some God in a cloud when you can be uploaded to the cloud. That was one of his statements on one of these world forums. And is this even possible? Well, Mr. Musk is working on some today. They already have brain chips that they're putting into people that are paraplegics or quadriplegics, where they can, through their mind, operate their computers and phones and such. Right? So this is happening today with our technocrats. And he even said that he would like to be the first one that's not physically in need of it to have this brain implant put in. Have you been hearing the word transhuman lately? I mean, every single day it's in the news. And the transhuman means a mix of humans and technology. Others are calling it humans 2.0 or version 2.0, mixing a human with computerization, AI computers and the cloud, storing your memory, so on and so forth. I mentioned the 6 fingers and 6 toes. I find it interesting that when AI today puts out a picture, if you see them online, of an AI produced picture, the people have 6 fingers and 6 toes. And if you want a recent example, one of the Israeli hostages who was just released was standing on the platform. Behind them was a Hamas banner with a fist being held up behind him. And it had 6 fingers on the fist. Right? So how many fingers and toes on the Nephilim? Exactly. Now, some more information on these Nephilim for those that scoff or say this is all allegorical or it's just crazy talk. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5 said, "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness," and we know that's the bottomless pit because we're going to see them released in Revelation 9, verses 1 through 3. At least we won't see them, but the world will see them at that time. They were to be reserved for judgment. So they're going to be judged after the tribulation. They're also going to be used to judge the world at that time. They're the demonic locust things that are released from the bottomless pit. And in verse 5, and did not spare the ancient world, but he spared Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood of the world on the ungodly. So who was Peter? He was one of Jesus's inner circle. Peter, James, John, and Andrew were the inner circle. In Jude 6, verse 6, it says, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, which is heaven, but left their own abode," this is where they were to live, "he has reserved them in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." So basically saying the same thing Peter said. Jude was the brother of Jesus. Now, I would think Peter and Jude, these 2 guys would know, and that they're telling the exact same story. And they're both, one's a brother of Jesus, the other is one of his top men who would head the church. So they're telling the same story that we read in Genesis here with the Nephilim. So what happened to the Nephilim at the flood? Okay, we know the flood killed everybody but Noah's family. But remember, they were in a human form. They were half human, but they were also half demon. So my guess is that the human part were killed in the flood, but the demonic part of them, the demonic spirit, lived on. And the reason I say that, if you read on in Genesis 6, verse 4, it says there were giants on the earth in those Noah's days and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men. So it's the same picture happening again. And they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So afterward is talking about after the flood. This still happens. And you can read this in Genesis 14, Genesis 15, Numbers 13:33 refers to the giants, Deuteronomy 3:11, and then in Joshua 12, right? The 10 of the 12 spies come back and say, "We look like grasshoppers in their eyes." And we have the story of King David slaying Goliath and his brothers that were all giants and had 6 fingers and 6 toes. And then we have King David's, some of his troops referred to as the mighty men of old. So there's plenty of evidence that these people still existed on the planet after the flood. And so Satan and plenty of his demons are still alive and well today. And they may very well be indwelling some of these technocrats who are developing the transhuman effort, right? I'm not saying that for certain that this is happening today, but I honestly believe that it is. And there may be some people that have already done it, right? Because things happen long before we ever hear about it. So I would not be shocked if some of these technocrats have already uploaded their brains into the cloud and perhaps are getting some forbidden knowledge. Now, I'll go into this further in another short that I'm going to do, looking into the 10 kings of Revelation and also the 10 toes on Nebuchadnezzar's statue in the book of Daniel, right? Both refer to a mix of clay and iron. And I'm beginning to think that those passages are confusing, and you think maybe strong humans and weak humans. I'm beginning to think it may be referring to a mix of humans, think version 1.0 clay and version 2.0 iron or metallic or technical. So just keep listening and watching for talk about this transhuman stuff developing. I think there's a very close connection here, and that we're really close to these things happening. Now, another pre-tribulation sign, I think, when you look at this passage in Luke 21, verse 11, it says, there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines and pestilences. We're seeing all this today. And there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. And I just came across this as I was studying this. Fearful sights in the Greek is the word phobotron, which means something that strikes fear in the ancient days. But in modern Greek, that same word describes monsters, which is interesting. And it says you're going to see these monsters. And then it says great signs from heaven, coming down directly from heaven. Apo in Greek means departing, which could mean just about anything, but it also means fleeing, expelled from, thrown out, or from heaven. So think of monsters being thrown out of or expelled from heaven. And you have the very same picture happening in the days that Jesus is talking about that happened back at this time. So could this mean that we're going to see a repeat of falling angels coming down from the heavens? And we, if we're still here, would see some monstrous things coming down from the heavens. This might explain some of the recent UFO sightings, right? And I could speculate on that, but I won't on this short. But let's not get scared, but just be prepared for that trumpet to call us home and anyone else we can bring with us. Because a lot of these things are happening right before us. The good news is that we are here now restraining what's coming, and it can't come completely until we're taken out of here. So just continue to pray, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Now let's jump ahead to the days of Lot, because that was the other part of his dissertation. This is another thing that's getting my attention. How about the days of Lot? Do we see any similarities today worldwide? Sorry. In Luke 17, verses 28 and 29, Jesus said, likewise, as it was also in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, and they built. But on the very day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. So on the very day, there was no warning for what happened in that day. I don't believe there's going to be any warning with the tribulation. It's going to be a day like any other day. And I think the rapture is going to be this. If it's before then it's going to be the exact same thing. In Genesis 19, verses 4 and 5, it says, now before they, think Lot and the two angels that came to visit he and his family, laid down to sleep, the men of the city in Sodom and Gomorrah, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter, they surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, and they said to him, "Where are the men, the two angels, who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them carnally, sexually, intimately." This is what was going on at that time. Now, further in Ezekiel 16, verse 49, we're told this about Sodom and Gomorrah. "Look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter Gomorrah had pride, fullness of food, an abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy." And now we have Paul writing to us today in Romans, out of Romans chapter 1, verse 26 to 29. "Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error which was due. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting." And then he lists them: sexual immorality, haters of God, proud, inventors of evil things, approve of those who practice them, and are unmerciful. Sounds an awful lot like today. Now, notice the following things here. Things were going along as usual, just like in the days of Noah. The men wanted to carnally know, meaning sexually, other men. They approved of people doing these same disgusting things. They even encouraged it. Okay, their kids were involved, according to Genesis and according to Jesus. And I'm thinking of drag queen shows for the children, right? Dragging the kids into this stuff. It says that the people were prideful, they were comfortable, they had plenty of time on their hands, and they could care less about the poor and the needy. And the judgment came after God removed, think of rapture again, Lot from harm's way. And what happened to Lot? He took him and the two daughters, because his wife turned and became a stone pillar, went up on a mountain, up above the judgment that was taking place. Think again, another picture of a rapture or a heaven type. So how does this match up to today? Well, things are pretty normal today, right? Nothing to see here. To the world, everything seems to be going along just fine. Do we see any abnormalities in regard to sexual issues today? Well, if I think about abortion rates, abortion centers are primarily located where? In low-income minority communities. So what are they doing? They target poor and needy. Sounds like Sodom and Gomorrah. The U.S. is paying for them here and in other countries with taxpayer money, right? So money is no issue. They have more than enough. We have teen pregnancies and preteens having sex. In other words, no consequence sex. You can remove the problem pregnancy without a parent even knowing about it. This process is being taught in the schools from kindergarten up. And some cases, kindergarten kids are even involved in being educated in the practices. And you have these strange shows going on for the children. And even in some small C churches, right? And how does this fit in? Even Lot and his family were being affected by this. And Lot is called a righteous man by the Lord. So seeing these things happening in some of the today's what's called a church, knowing that it happened to Lot and his family is basically the same. Remember, Lot's two daughters were married to two guys who went along with what happened, the attempt on the angels. We also have something, it's called bestiality or zoophilia. So we've gone from fornication and adultery, which we've known about all our lives, to this outbreak of homosexual behavior, now to bestiality, which is already legal in some countries. And then you just got to wonder what they're going to come up with next. Maybe changing genders, right? And doing it to people who don't even know what those parts are used for today, right? Denying God's creation. Uh, we used to call that stuff child abuse. So I grew up in the 50s and 60s. This stuff didn't exist back then as a norm, at least in society. And in July 2012, Billy Graham said, if God doesn't punish America, he'll have to give an apology to Sodom and Gomorrah. And I have a feeling that punishment is about to hit us. We are so much like that time. We're way past what Billy was seeing at his time. And as a final thought here, we're being told that just before the Great Flood, the Nephilim were involved in bringing advancements in technology, genetic modification, AI, supernatural, and occult knowledge. Not necessarily in those terms, but everything they were transmitting to the people on the planet at that time. So we may not have giants walking among us right now, but that same influence is raging today. And you wonder how can that happen? In Ephesians 2:2, it says, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience, referring to Satan and his fallen angels. So if I'm right about this connection between possibly the UFOs and fallen angels, then you have to wonder, could some of the world's elites be actually working with these like mankind was with fallen angels back in the days of Noah and Lot? So we saw that the fallen ones were sharing forbidden knowledge with men back in Noah's days. We sure seem to be moving in that same direction today. So pay attention to what the technocrats have to say and do now, because I believe there's a connection. You can watch for these things in the news. So, Lord, give us ears to hear and eyes to see what you're wanting us to grasp so we can warn as many people as possible while we still can. In Jesus' name, amen. That's it for this short. We're going to follow up with another short that has to do with the Mount of Olives. And so hopefully you'll be able to tune in for that one. We'll see you next time.